And I will take all these thoughts and feelings and pain and everything with me as I go along my journey.
Tonight, an emotional walk for MMIWG on the Hwy of Tears.
The federal government has fallen flat on its face.
Plus, the Trudeau government taken to task over the ongoing missing and murdered crisis.
When you take off and never come down, not with plane, but with your spiritual, physical body, you're flying.
And Valentine's Day in the cold north, how some couples keep their love alive. Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. We start with breaking news out of Ottawa. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has invoked the Emergencies Act for the first time in history. Trucks were on the move in downtown Ottawa Monday, but they didn't get very far. In a deal brokered by Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson, they were escorted by police out of primarily residential streets to Wellington Street. In a news conference, Trudeau explained law enforcement will have more resources to deal with the protests.
The police will be given more tools to restore order in places where public assemblies can constitute illegal and dangerous activities, such as blockades and occupations, as seen in Ottawa, the Ambassador Bridge, and elsewhere. These tools include strengthening their ability to impose fines or imprisonment. The government will designate, secure, and protect places and infrastructure that are critical to our economy and people's jobs, including border crossings and airports.
Today is the National Day of Action for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Advocate Krista Fox is preparing to walk across Canada to raise awareness. She met up with fellow advocates and families on the notorious Hwy of Tears. APTN's Lee Wilson has that story.
MMIWG families and advocates welcome Krista Fox with drumming and ceremony. She's a North Battleford, Saskatchewan mother and grandmother, and is preparing to walk across Canada to raise awareness for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Earlier this month, she had an emotional journey from Prince George to Terrace, BC, along the Hwy of Tears, a notorious name due to the high numbers of Indigenous people who have gone missing there since the 1970s. Fox says she had a powerful experience walking with the family of Francis Brown, who went missing in 2017 near Smithers.
And it was an amazing experience, you know, when we walked and we held arms and then we connected and held hands, and it was just like I felt his pain, you know, he misses his mom so much.
Later this month, on February 18th, Fox's birthday, her official walk will begin from Victoria, BC. Fox plans to carry all of the motions from meeting MMIWG families on her journey. She'll meet more families on the 10-month walk across the country.
And I will take all these thoughts and feelings and pain and everything with me as I go along my journey.
I wanted to build a totem pole along the Hwy of Tears to remind people that there's girls and men missing on this highway.
MMIWG advocate Gladys Raddick was in Kitsamkalem to meet Fox on the highway. Raddick completed a walk across Canada, raising awareness in 2008. She was also a key person behind raising the memorial pole on Highway 16. Krista Fox hopes that on her journey across Canada, she can meet with policymakers for Indigenous issues and create change together.
This is a genocide. This is our missing and murdered Indigenous women, men, children, and this has to stop.
She says people often ask her what they can do to support MMIWG families. She encourages them to keep showing up.
I always say half of the battle is showing up. So I just would like people to keep showing up. Keep supporting the families in your community. Keep finding out, keep asking questions, keep, sharing on social media, whatever the case may be, because nothing feels better than knowing that somebody cares.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitsamkalem.
It has been close to 3 years since the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls released its final report. Back then, the federal government promised to address the calls to justice. But as APTN's Fraser Needham reports, advocates and families are still waiting.
The final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls was given to Prime Minister Trudeau with much fanfare in June 2019. The lengthy report contains 231 calls to justice, but critics say not enough has happened since then, and they lay the blame squarely at the Trudeau government's feet. One of the government's fiercest critics is the inquiry's former chief commissioner.
The federal government has fallen flat on its face. We don't have an implementation plan. There hasn't been any sort of cohesive statement on the part of the federal government about what it plans to do. There's no looking forward. If there is an implementation plan, I don't know about it, and they're keeping it quiet. But they have quite literally fallen flat on their face in terms of their responses.
In response, the Crown Indigenous Relations Minister says there's always room for improvement, and instead chose to focus on the government's $2 billion Pathway program.
For me, that's a signal that we need to do better and look at what we've done critically. There's no denying that the pathway is very significant. It was co-developed. It's trauma-informed, but it's also one that isn't perfect, and I think we have to be mature enough to acknowledge that.
NDP MP Leah Gazan questioned Miller about the National Action Plan during Monday's question period.
This government needs to immediately stop political sound bites and instead offer meaningful solution, Mr. Speaker. When will this government implement the calls for justice and stop the genocide?
But Miller's answer was short on specifics of if and when an action plan is forthcoming.
This is something that we say is whole of government, but implies every minister in our cabinet and then frankly everyone in this House to make sure that we're living up to our goals and the calls for justice, which are vast in nature, but first and foremost have to be trauma-informed and focused on those who are still suffering in silence. Monday
is also the 31st anniversary of the Women's Memorial March in Vancouver. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
For more with former Commissioner Marion Bullard, check out this week's episode of Face to Face. She'll be joining Dennis Ward. That's Tuesday after the newscast. And a new Saskatchewan film is drawing a direct link between residential schools and the 60s scoop to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. APTN's Leanne Sanders brings us this report and a warning some may find the content of this story disturbing.
Sonia Bear is one of 5 60s scoop kids who tells her heart-wrenching story. In the documentary, everything is connected.
Yeah, just that feeling of being unwanted is tough. Not knowing who you are, not knowing what to do. Like even growing up, I was ashamed to be a Native because all I saw was drunks, and that's all I was told. I was going to be nothing but a drunk when I grow up. And that one time I remember I was in a tub. I was just scrubbing my skin real hard because I didn't want to be brown anymore. I made my skin bleed how hard I was scratching.
Bear's story, and those of the other participants, draws back the curtain on how colonialism, the residential school system, and the 60s scoop directly impacted generations of Indigenous children, and how it's all linked to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada. Betty Ann Adam is another 60s scoop kid and producer of the film.
Absolutely, there are difficult stories, both in their childhoods as 60s scoop kids and also in the terrible experiences of losses in their families. But we also see all of them have gone on to live lives as people who know who they are and are all still on journeys to find out who they are, but are also, we see a lot of connection to culture and spirituality, and of course connections with their families where possible.
Everything is Connected was funded by the federal government, First Nations University Canada, Sask Culture, and the Amiskasey's Samaginus Worm Family Foundation. The stories are all different, but they all have one thing in common.
Some are very positive, some are very difficult, and it's everything in between and shades of gray. And I think that as 60 Scoop people, this is what we seek to do, is to have our experience registered on the national consciousness, that we're here, that we went through a situation not unlike our ancestors who went through the residential schools. And we stand in solidarity with all of the families of people who have gone missing or murdered.
The 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Saskatchewan is working on a film viewing and panel discussion to examine the documentary in more detail. The film is available online at everythingisconnected.ca. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
We want to hear your thoughts on the National Day of Action for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca or leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. All right, we need to take a short break, but still to come. The Mohawk Nation of Kahnawake has been a major player in the online gaming world for decades.
It's very important for us to have own source revenue, to put resources into things that maybe we don't get as much money from the government to do so.
Welcome back to APTN National News. February is Inuit Language Month. 65% of Nunavummiut list Inuktitut as their first language. Our Kent Driscoll introduces us to an Inuk woman who didn't learn Inuktitut until adulthood. This from Iqaluit.
Karen Kabluna didn't learn Inuktitut as a child growing up in Baker Lake, Nunavut. She was raised speaking English. That meant she couldn't understand one of the most important people in her life.
My grandmother only spoke Inuktitut, and I would communicate as much as I could in Inuktitut, and she would communicate as much as she could in English, but it was a long-term goal of mine to have an adult conversation with her.
Now working and living in Iqaluit, Kabluna decided to take a full-time Inuktitut course at MMIWG, a language training school here in Iqaluit. She started just before the pandemic hit and ended up doing some of the coursework online. Full-time Inuktitut immersion. After a year, she's fluent enough to make work presentations in Inuktitut. She's the CEO of Nunavut Tungavik, Nunavut's land claims organization. Even for an Inuit organization, some ideas don't quite translate.
I don't know how to say Comptroller General, so some of my presentation to the board was a little limited. I'm not familiar with a lot of the traditional terminology, but I can certainly get by.
Inuktitut resources in Nunavut are mostly geared towards children. Adults have to deal with that gap and end up having to use course materials designed for children. And that's a lot of C. Jane run. For Kabluna, the reward for the hard work was a better sense of who she is.
Learning Inuktitut for me was as much about learning a language as it was about reclaiming my identity. So it was emotionally very intense to present, speaking to adults in general. It's a lot of joy that I can finally do this. It's a lot of intimidation. It's a lot of sadness that I'm an adult before I could do this.
Inuit Language Month continues throughout February, but there's never a bad time to speak Inuktitut in Nunavut. 77% of all Nunavummiut say they can carry on a conversation in Inuktitut. Now Kabluna can too. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
The Mohawk Nation of Kahnawake has been a major player in the online gaming world for decades. Now they've caught the eyes of APTN, a UK-based gaming corporation. APTN has acquired a Kahnawake-owned service provider, but despite the success, Canadian and provincial governments still don't recognize the legality of Kahnawake's gaming operations. Amelia Fournier has more.
Kahnawake may be easy to drive past en route to Montreal, but it's impossible to miss in the online gaming world. It's home of the iGaming company Mohawk Online, owned and operated by the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake.
The evolution of where we've been in online gaming has been amazing.
How amazing? APTN, a multinational online gaming corporation, acquired Avid, Mohawk Online's business-to-business provider, for 300 million Canadian dollars. Mohawk Online CEO Dean Montour said it won't affect day-to-day operations, but could encourage growth.
The fact that, we have, I'll say, an unlimited resource, backing from them is very helpful for us in our operations here as a First Nations in Canada.
Mohawk Online operates iGaming site Sports Interaction. Grand Chief Gusanahaway Skydeer says being an online gaming hub has helped Kahnawake prosper.
It's very important for us to have own source revenue to put resources into things that maybe we don't get as much money from the government to do so.
The council developed their own regulatory framework in 1996 and established the Kahnawake Gaming Commission under Mohawk jurisdiction. The Mohawk Internet Technologies Data Center hosts iGaming websites across the world. Yet while MCK's online gaming is doing well internationally, their online gaming industry has yet to have official legal recognition from the Canadian and Quebec government.
Anytime it feels like First Nations people try to create any kind of industry for themselves, whether it's tobacco or gaming, if any kind of external governments aren't benefiting from it, whether it's some kind of tax regime or permitting system, they deem it illegal or that it's contraband.
Canada's gaming legislation indicates that all gaming must be regulated by provinces. While Ganawage is still lobbying for an amendment to include First Nations as regulators, the Ontario government is pushing Mohawk Online to get permits for the province.
But when you have a PLC like Entain invest in Ganawage, it is a nod to the business, the success of our business, and it's also a nod to, politically to the legality of our jurisdiction.
They've operated under Mohawk sovereign jurisdiction, as per Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. Murray Marshall, a lawyer for Mohawk Online, says the government of Canada and of Quebec have taken a hands-off approach.
More than 25 years that Ganawage has been exercising and asserting its jurisdiction over gaming. There's never been a legal challenge.
They actually have Lottery Quebec terminals all in our territory. We don't really see any kind of return or benefit from that, so we kind of just coexist, I guess, at this point, and I think that's the way it should be.
Emilia Fournier, APTN National News, Ganawage Mohawk Territory.
All right, we need to step aside for one final break, but still ahead, it's Valentine's Day, which means we'll have a good old-fashioned love story.
When I look at her with love in my eyes, not only my physical eyes, also my spiritual eyes. I listen to her. I love her with my ears. I listen.
Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. This was sent to us by Pat Chapizia, another great photo that Pat sent to us from the Buckinghorse, British Columbia area. Just a stunning region, and thanks for sharing, Pat. If you want to hear your name and see your pictures shared across Turtle Island, send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Beginning in the east, -11 in snow in Charlottetown and -8 in snow in Halifax. -22 in Happy Valley Goose Bay and -18 in Cartwright. -12 in Quebec City and -16 in Val d'Or. -6 in a mix of sun and cloud in Sarnia and -13 in sun in North Bay. minus 16 in sun in Big Trout Lake, and minus 14 in Timmins. Minus 26 in Churchill, and minus 19 in snow in Thompson. Minus 12 and snowing in Gimli, and snow and minus 10 in Winnipeg. Minus 10 and sunshine in North Battleford, and minus 10 in Saskatoon. Minus 14 in snow in La Ronge, and minus 25 in snow in Stony Rapids. Over in the west, snow and minus 22 in Fort Chipewyan, and minus 7 in Grand Prairie. Snowing in Edmonton, and minus 6, and plus 1 in Calgary. Plus 9 and sunshine in Tofino, and plus 3 in Quesnel. Plus 5 and it looks like sleet in Prince Rupert, and minus 4 in Dease Lake. Minus 8 and cloudy in Beaver Creek, and minus 34 in Old Crow. Minus 31 in Norman Wells, and minus 32 in Yellowknife. Minus 33 in Inuvik, and minus 36 in Fort McPherson. Minus 30 and snowing in Baker Lake, and minus 28 in Cambridge Bay. Minus 26 in snow in Resolute, and minus 32 in Iqaluit. Today is Valentine's Day, and for many, February 14th is a day to recognize their appreciation for their significant other. And as our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs learns, it takes teamwork and a whole lot of love to make a partnership last.
Every morning I get up, I love you, honey.
Dennis Shorty and Jennifer Froling have been sweethearts for 15 years. Even their bling combines their names, signifying their union to one another.
And when you take off and never come down, not with plane, but with your spiritual, physical body, you're flying, you're still up there. I'm still there with my honeys.
The couple live in Ross River, Yukon, and happily tour the north with their band Denezagi, singing in the Kaska language. But in the beginning of their relationship, it was a lot of learning.
And I was born in GDR in East Germany. It's everything over here. And when I met Dennis, I was so different. The cultures are so different, right? Like we were slashing together, different food, different language, first of all.
Shorty says as a residential school survivor, he carried a lot of trauma when he met Froling.
When she came over, she didn't know about residential school, but the first residential school meeting was in Whitehorse. We both went to it. Then their eyes kind of opened up. And
their secret to a long-lasting relationship? Loving wholeheartedly.
When I look at her with love in my eyes. Not only my physical eyes, also my spiritual eyes. I listen to her. I love her with my ears. I listen. Not only physical, but spiritual.
Roger Fraser and Karen Wright Fraser of Yellowknife are also a traveling duo, teaching traditional art and repairing sewing machines across the NWT in Nunavut.
Well, for our 20th anniversary, I brought her to China. And then for our 30th, I went and picked her up.
The Quitchin sweethearts say they stick to their values.
We always have respect for one another. We may not agree, sometimes, but we always have respect.
All jokes aside, they also share healing together.
Our sobriety.
Oh yeah.
Our sobriety.
The biggest thing. Well, we broke the cycle of the alcoholism. Then we break the cycle of poverty from going back to school. So that way we could have a good life, provide a good life for our children.
For Roger and Karen, they say every day is Valentine's Day when they are together.
I try to spoil her sometimes, but she don't want to be spoiled. She's, so it's
independent.
Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Thanks for that, Charlotte. You can certainly feel the love coming through the screen. All right, that's all we have for you tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm Daryl Stranger. Have a great night.